so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. We're going to start sort of relatively early. Often we give these things a little bit longer, but I'm conscious that for any football fans there might be something which is dragging them away from 9 o'clock, and particularly for our colleagues who've come over from Germany who have a little bit more of a vested interest than perhaps the English football fans who got bored with the World Cup rather a long time ago. I'm John Hilary, I'm the Executive Director of War on Want, so it's my real pleasure to be able to chair this evening's discussion around TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and there's going to be a lot of good talk as to what this is, where it came from, how we can defeat it, and everything like that. But this is a campaign which War on Want and many other groups have been doing together, the World Development Movement, with the trade unions in this country. And particularly I want to just start by saying a big thank you to Unison. And Dave Auger, who's going to be able to say a big thanks to us as well from the back for everybody coming. But it's very kind, Dave, of you to host us here, and Dave's very kind to us to the room.
The applause will probably take longer than what I'm going to say. But, yeah, my name's Dave Auger. I'm the International Officer for the West Midlands Unison region. I'm also on the NEC of Unison, which is where I became aware of this insidious proposal. I must be honest, it was certainly under my radar, and it's probably under a lot of people's radar. But when I became aware of the serious threat it posed to public services and democracy itself, we were more than happy to support this meeting tonight and welcome you to, well, I'm not from Birmingham, so I welcome yourself as well.
Dave, thank you very much. We really appreciate that, and for having got this space for us and everything. And also, this would not be possible as an evening without the amazing support of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation's Brussels office. For those of you who don't know, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation is a German foundation which has linked through various sort of clever manoeuvres to the left party in Germany and gets a lot of funding through from the central government in order to be able to do events like this across Europe. And they've been absolutely at the forefront of pushing the campaign to get rid of TTIP in country after country after country. And it's due to their finance and their help that we're able to have this evening. So I want to just pull up Florian Horn from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation's Brussels office, just to say a couple of words to start us off as well. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. I don't have to add much to what John already said. What we are the political foundation in Germany affiliated with the Die Linke party, and we are aiming to promote democratic socialism. So therefore we're doing a lot of political education work. We have 17 offices worldwide where we're doing educational work, and we have our headquarters in Berlin, of course. And the Brussels office is working basically in the European region, in the EU region. And so, as John already said, because we have been working a lot on to get to an ecologically and social just international society. So TTIP is of course a very big thing for us, and we are very happy that we have so many interesting partners in our work, especially John from War on Want. And of course, we're very happy to have Dave Auger from Unison here tonight, and World Development Movement's Nick Dearden, so thank you very much again. And we're very happy to bring you Belinda St. Louis from Public Citizens in the United States, who we already met when we did a huge civil society meeting in Brussels on TTIP, and of course Ulrike Herrmann from the German newspapers Tageszeitung. We did already events with Ulrike in Athens, we did events with John in Rome, so we are trying to spread the No TTIP agenda all over Europe, and I hope it will get viral in the UK too. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we also have Dr. Klaus Zuhl, who's also the director of the Brussels office of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, here with us as well. So much, I mean, that's the sort of the scene setting. And I'm going to call on each of the three speakers to talk a bit about the politics of TTIP, where it came from, and particularly what we can do to fight back against it, both here in Birmingham, the West Midlands, but also across Britain and more generally. But my job, in a sense, is just to set the scene a little bit with some background on TTIP. I'm assuming that because everybody's come out to a discussion on this, that you have heard a little bit about TTIP already. Noddings and more or less. Only a bit. Well, let me just sort of set out where it came from and what the basic bones of it are. TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and you'll see there are a couple of booklets which we've given everybody here. If you want more copies of these, they give much more information about it. It's a comprehensive trade and investment agreement currently being negotiated in secret between the European Commission, on behalf of all of us, and the US government. And they started the negotiations back in July last year. That was the first round. And every 2 months since then, they've been negotiating further, sometimes in Brussels, sometimes over in the USA. And the idea on their part is to try to finish these negotiations, to rush them through to a conclusion by the end of 2015 at the latest. Because they know that if it gets into 2016, it's going to bump into the US presidential elections, when they're going to see who's going to succeed Barack Obama, and by that time they won't have any political space to negotiate anything at all. As I say, these are negotiations which are going on completely in secret. What we found out about it has come through leaked documents, which we've been able to get out from the centre of the negotiations, but also from some of the wish lists that some of the corporate lobbyists have put in, saying what they want to see coming out of this. Because the genesis of TTIP is out of the corporate world, out of the business lobbies, which say they want to try to remove any restrictions on their profit making on either side of the Atlantic. So this isn't the Europeans against the Americans, or the Americans against the Europeans. This is big business on both sides of the Atlantic, trying to remove restrictions on their profits, and thereby trying to get rid of all of the environmental standards, the labour standards, the food safety standards, and all of the blocks on things like fracking that we would really rather like to hold and keep as far as we can. There are three main bits of TTIP, and I know others are going to cover this as well, so I'm going to whiz through them. The first is this deregulation agenda. TTIP is not like a traditional trade agreement where you get rid of tariff barriers from the border. It's deliberately reaching behind the border and saying we want to get rid of the regulations, the standards, the rights, which can sometimes be a drag to big business when they want to make better profits. So labour standards can be a drag if you try and raise the minimum wage and keep sort of chipping away at, profits of the big multinationals. The bans on genetically modified foods in Europe, for example, that really narks some of the big US agribusiness firms. So it's getting rid of those standards as the central pillar. The second is to try to expand the reach of the private sector into public spaces, public services, health, education, here for us obviously the NHS being crucial in that respect, education services, sewerage, water services, all of the different range of things which we want to keep in public hands, or, like the railways and the post, bring back into public hands so that we can have a proper, comprehensive and socially just service. Those are all being targeted under TTIP. That's the second part. The third part is new rights for investors, and particularly this extraordinary new power where corporations get to sue the government where they're operating for any public policy which might restrict their profits in the future. And there are lots of examples which I think people are going to be able to bring up on this, but it's just an extraordinary thing where for the first time these big multinationals bypass the courts that we all have to deal with, bypass the courts that even domestic companies would have to deal with, and they get special rights to go to international arbitration tribunals, which is like kangaroo courts, not even with judges. We have 3 corporate lawyers who are able to just dictate whether or not your country has to give hundreds of millions of pounds in damages. That's the sort of scene setting of it. And I know that, as I say, the discussion and all of the points that people are going to make in the next couple of minutes are going to really flesh out that. But we, just to finalise this sort of open spiel, we see TTIP as a real threat. We see it as the biggest transfer of power to transnational capital that has taken place in a generation. This is all they tried to do in the 1990s, and we beat them off time and time again. They tried to do it through multilateral agreement on investment, for those of you who remember that. We beat them. They tried to do it through the WTO. We beat them again. And now they're back. And it's absolutely crucial that we defeat this here, because they see TTIP as the template for the future. It's not just what happens between Europe and the US. This is the model they want to roll out around the world, where people's needs and the environmental sustainability of the planet are completely subordinated to the profit-making motive of capital. And that's what we're trying to fight against here. And that's my 7-minute spiel of exactly what we're talking about. I'm really pleased now to be able to hand over to the speakers and to be able to sit down and leave you to hear their wise words. And first up is going to be Melinda St. Louis, who's already been introduced. There was a little discussion who's going to go first and second, but she's going to go first. And it's really important that Melinda's come over from the States, because she can give us a sense of what people are feeling over there about TTIP, how they see it, and how the resistance is building in the US. So can you give her a really warm round of applause to start the
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much to be here in Birmingham. I just arrived a couple of hours ago from Washington, so if I don't make a ton of sense, that's why. I'm a little bit bleary-eyed, but it's a real pleasure to be here and to be standing in solidarity with brothers and sisters here in the UK and across Europe to really challenge the corporate-driven agenda of the TTIP. In the US, we actually call this TAFTA, the Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement, which is actually what it was originally called back in the 90s when Business Europe and the US Chamber of Commerce were really trying to push this. They were pushing a TAFTA. The name changed, and we're pretty sure that it is because anything that rhymes with NAFTA in the United States is hated across the board. And NAFTA is the North America Free Trade Agreement, which was the first of these massive so-called trade agreements where that went well beyond what we think of as trade, well beyond what we think of as allowing goods to cross borders, but actually packaging in all of these other pieces, these investor rights, these intellectual property rights that expand monopolies, all food safety, all of these other aspects of our daily lives that are packaged as a so-called trade agreement. And so this year was the 20th anniversary marked the 20th anniversary of the implementation of NAFTA in the United States. And so we now actually have 20 years of data of what this model of so-called free trade actually means. And for that reason, we have been, my organization, which is a consumer rights organization in the US, has been actively engaging on monitoring the impacts of these trade agreements and then fighting against this expansion of this model. In the early 1990s, NAFTA was sold to the people of the United States as a way to increase growth, to increase jobs. Hundreds of 200,000 jobs a year were going to be created by NAFTA. We're going to have a trade surplus with Mexico and Canada. We would decrease income inequality, raise living standards across all three countries, decrease immigration from Mexico, which was a major problem at the time because everyone in Mexico was going to be doing so much better they wouldn't be coming to the US. What we realized is that very little of the model had much to do with trade, as I mentioned. And unfortunately, we were right. 20 years later, by 2004, 1 million jobs by the US government's own statistics had been lost, as opposed to the 200,000 per year in the United States. 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs in the US, that's 5 million, were offshored from the United States. That has decimated the manufacturing base. And this wasn't just because of NAFTA, it was also the WTO and others, but it was this era of corporate globalization that decimated manufacturing. And that impacted not just the manufacturing jobs, but it depressed wages across the board because lower paying service sector jobs replaced them. When someone's job was offshored, if they got another job, they earned an average of 20% less in that. Economists agree that our trade policy increased income inequality in the United States. There's some debate about how much, but everyone agrees across the political spectrum that that's been an important piece. And incredibly, it's not that the US lost and Canada and Mexico gained. Actually, incredibly, it decimated the workers in those countries as well, and particularly in Mexico. 2 million small-scale farmers were displaced due to the dumping of US corn, and immigration from Mexico doubled in the years after NAFTA was implemented. And so we see that the promises of growth and new jobs, that just is not borne out in the data. And what we're seeing, and NAFTA also included the very controversial provision that John mentioned, which is these extreme investor rights, where companies can sue the governments and get millions and billions of dollars in compensation for public interest policies. And we've tracked all these cases, and if you're interested, under the NAFTA and the US free trade agreements, just under those free trade agreements, there have been $450 million paid from taxpayers to corporations for policies around toxics bans, banning a toxic substance, land use rules, regulatory permits, water and timber policies. There are $38 billion paid in these cases currently under a US trade and investment pact. I could give you horror stories of some of these cases. There's a polluting smelter in Peru that has meant 99% of the children in the community have high levels of lead. It's the 10th most polluted community in the world. And now that smelter is suing the Peruvian government for $800 million because they didn't extend their ability to not clean up the plant. So we're seeing more and more of these. Medicine patent policies are being challenged, moratorium on fracking, climate and energy laws, pollution cleanups, across the board. And again, these are being heard outside of our domestic court systems by 3 private sector lawyers who are deciding the fate. And what we're seeing is more and more awards and damages supporting corporations and taxpayers. Our treasury is paying the consequences. So for these reasons, U.S. workers and citizens consider this 20-year experiment of NAFTA as a symbol of job loss, increasing income inequality, and a cancer on the middle class. It's not a surprise then, it's actually one of the only issues that unite the majority of Democrats, Republicans, and independents in the United States, that they actually do not support these NAFTA-style trade deals. Poll after poll has shown that. So that brings me to the TTIP. We consider this part of a new generation of these trade agreements. You would think that given this record, there would be a rethinking of the model and think about how we might learn the lessons from the past. And that's exactly what candidate Obama said on the campaign trail, that he would want to renegotiate NAFTA, would want to look at this investor-to-state system and change it. So we spent a lot of time and energy with the administration in the early years. This is a different model. We can think of new ways to do it. 21st century, let's do it right this time. But unfortunately, the administration, once they got in, one of the first things they did is they actually supported the passage of the U.S.-Korea FTA that was negotiated under the Bush administration and pushed that through. And then started the negotiation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is between the U.S. and 11 Pacific Rim countries, including Japan. Now, the way this negotiation has actually been more secretive and more behind closed doors than even in the past, even under George W. Bush. We're seeing it's even worse. There's 600 corporate advisors, explicitly corporations, that have access to the texts. They have a password. They can get on the website. They can provide input. They have access when the rest of us are completely locked out. Even members of the U.S. Congress, who have the constitutional authority over trade, for a long time could not see the text. Now they can see little bits and pieces of it. They can't take notes. They can't have their staff with them, and they can't talk about what they saw. So members of the U.S. Congress are getting very, very angry with the Obama administration about this, and we're seeing the same secretive, industry-biased approach in the TTIP negotiations. So given this experience, there's a broad coalition in the United States of labor, environment, family farm, faith, consumer organizations organized under what's called the Citizens Trade Campaign. There are others that have been mobilizing opposition to this corporate agenda of the TPP and TTIP. TPP is most urgent because actually they're trying to conclude the negotiations very soon. They've missed deadline after deadline because of citizen opposition and controversy, but that's been very important. But we are very concerned about what is happening in the TTIP negotiations, particularly. As John mentioned, this goes way behind the border, and this is not about trade. This is even less about trade than NAFTA was. And there's a lot to lose here in Europe in terms of the standards that you all enjoy, that we actually would like to achieve someday in terms of GMOs and food safety and so forth. But we also know the European Commission has taken direct aim at our buy local procurement policies. So policies to invest our tax dollars to reinvigorate our local economies and to support local business. That has been specifically attacked by the European Commission. They've gone after specifically 23 cities. They want to undo our buy local policies. And that is a very popular policy. 92% of Americans support that. All of the work that we've all done to try to rein in Wall Street and big banks post-financial crisis when they created this global casino that made us all, that created this recession. We know that they're trying to get even more financial deregulation in the TTIP negotiations. So they want to make it more difficult for governments to rein in capital. The investor-to-state dispute settlement, these extreme investor rights, if that's included in TTIP, there will be 75,000 corporations who will be newly empowered to be able to use this. So all the cases that we've seen, that's the tip of the iceberg. We will see a massive number of cases, both in the United States and Europe. It's absolutely certain. And the final concern we have is around this very mild-seeming term of regulatory cooperation, which John Oliver, who's my favorite British comedian in the US, recently said on his show about net neutrality. He said, if you want to do something truly evil, wrap it up in something incredibly boring. And I think regulatory cooperation will make our eyes glaze over. And yet, what it could mean is that our safeguards, for the future, would make it more difficult for us to use our democratic process to protect the public, and would give industry a seat at the table very early on. So I think I'll conclude by just saying that there is a broad movement in the United States that is very concerned about this, and that we are mobilizing and organizing, and I believe we can definitely stop this. Whenever there's been this corporate overreach and greed that has come to this extreme, we can beat it back, and like we did with the multilateral agreement on investment, the free trade area of the Americas in the U.S. was defeated because of citizen opposition, and we will do it again. We'll have to organize. We'll have to get out in the streets. We're going to have to do the work and work transatlantically to do so. But I'm really excited to be here. We need to do more educational events in the U.S. just like this, and so I think this is where we start. We shine a light on this. It's like the Dracula strategy. This only works when it's in the dark. When the light shined on, it starts to wither away. And I think that's what we're starting to do here today. And I'm encouraged to work alongside with you to do that.
Melinda, thank you very much. It's really inspiring, I think, to hear the sort of range of opposition that you've got in the States. And one of the things we really want to do in this country is to bring a similar coalition of forces together to try to fight TTIP here. And I know that some of those examples which you've brought out already will really resonate with people here. Just to touch on one, I mean, we don't realize this, I think. In the States, 70% of all processed food which is sold in supermarkets contains genetically modified organisms. 70%. It's basically 3/4 of all food is sold. Here, none. And it's that sort of thing that the US agribusiness lobby has said they're completely fed up with. They don't want to have these blocks on their exporting GM ingredients into Europe. So it's exactly that sort of thing that we're fighting here. And in my excitement to get this going, I realised I forgot to tell everybody where there's a fire exit. So, if there's a fire, we're going that way. That's that. And if you want to go to the loo, you're also going that way. There's a fire, we go that way too. We just run. Anyway, I'm really pleased now to be able to introduce Ulrike Herrmann from Germany, where there's been a much greater public awareness of the threat of TTIP that we've managed to have here. And I know it's going to be really good to hear from Ulrike about how that's happened. Florian said earlier that Ulrike is from the left-leaning German newspaper Taz, but also, perhaps more importantly for those of us who are here, the author of Free Trade, or Project of the Powerful, which is a number of the Rosa Luxemburg briefings on TTIP, which I think is really important for people to be able to take away with them. Ulrike, we're really pleased to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'd like to touch on some points that were already mentioned by John and by Linda, and then I'd come to this question, how come that in Germany the resistance against TTIP is so strong? In fact, I think that TTIP will never ever pass the German parliament. But perhaps before that, some introductory remarks. I mean, what is very obvious is that TTIP is not about trade, but about lobbyism. I mean, that's something John and Melinda said as well. That it can't be about trade is very easily shown. Trade is already flourishing between the US and Europe. Every day, 1.8 goods worth 1.8 billion euros are being shipped across the Atlantic every day. So you can see that the trade is already working, and you do not need a trade agreement in order to have more trade. Which means, of course, if you have already trade, very intensive trade, this trade agreement will not create any new jobs. I mean, that's something that the history of NAFTA showed as well, but you know, even the European Commission admits that TTIP will not lead to any substantial growth. You know, they had a study made by an institute in London, and the result was that there will be growth of 0.5% till 2027. Now, that's not per year, that's the growth in total. So for the next 14 years, you have this growth of 0.5%, which means per year 0.036%, which is just within the range of error. Or margin of error. So you can just forget about jobs, forget about growth. And that it is not about trade, you can also see by another kind of argument. If you really look at what is the real barrier to trade, it's not the tariffs, and it's not the so-called non-tariff barriers that John mentioned, like regulations on food or on chemicals or whatever. The real barrier to trade is the currency speculation. I mean, something that's mostly done in London. I mean, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, and in New York. Wall Street is also very important. Anyway, every day, not per year, every day, $5.3 trillion, trillions, not billions, $1 trillion are used to speculate with currencies. Now, the entire world trade per year is only 18.4 trillion US dollars. So you can see immediately that the currency speculation has nothing to do with real trade anymore. It's gone beyond, far beyond that. Now, but of course, the currency speculation has very severe consequences for real trade, because just for the German case, I mean, between 2010 and 2013, the relation between the euro and the dollar swayed between 1.20 to 1.50 to the dollar, which means for a German exporter, and you know that Germany is, of course, one of the main export nations in the world, you know, without doing anything, being an exporter, you are confronted with the fact that your goods can become more expensive by 25% within a few months. Now, this is the real barrier to trade. But you all know that about currency speculation, nothing is ever mentioned, let alone done. it would be very easy to stop currency speculation, but that would be another topic. But you just never hear about it, despite its being so harmful. So it's obvious that this whole TTIP issue has nothing to do with trade, but only with lobbyism. Now, I'd like to enlarge on one point. How is this lobbyism going to be done? One thing is, of course, what John and Melinda mentioned very extensively. That's these investment protection clauses, or ISDS as it's called, the possibility of companies to sue a state. That's one point of, one track of lobbyism. The other one, and I think that's as dangerous and not as often mentioned, is that TTIP is supposed to be a so-called living agreement. There's something Melinda mentioned at the very end of her speech. You know, it's not about the present, it's about the future. So what will be done is that this agreement will have two steps. Step one is that you just agree on anything that's easy to agree on. A famous example are the, I hope that it's the right word, you know, the cars have blinkers on at the back. And I don't have a driving license, so I'm a complete ignorant. But I think that the blinkers in Europe are orange and they are red in the United States. Of course, that's somehow strange, or the other way around. Of course, you know that no one would really care to somehow have one color for blinkers in the US and in Europe, and of course it would be for the mobile car industry kind of nice to have just one blinker instead of two. So of course, you know, perhaps you know there are issues like that that you can agree on. There will be other things that it's obvious that you cannot agree on that will be left out of the treaty. For example, chemicals. The whole chemical industry is already excluded from the treaty because it's obvious that it is impossible to agree on how to define risk. In Europe, we have a regulation, a EU regulation called REACH. We have the so-called precautionary principle. That means that everything is deemed to be dangerous that is not proven to be not dangerous. Now, the US have a principle that works just the other way around. It's called the so-called scientific principle. That means everything is considered to be not dangerous unless it's proven to be dangerous. So you can imagine that it is impossible to combine these two principles, to reconciliate them. So, you know, the chemical industry is no longer talked about. Another thing that will not happen, and which I think is very important to mention, we will not have the so-called chlorinated chicken in Europe. I don't know whether have you ever heard of the chlorinated chicken? No. Germans are very alarmed about the chlorinated chicken. Yes.
So maybe
you know, in the United States, apparently, chicken are somehow, the chicken meat, when it's already processed, is being bathed into chlorine. Yes, in order to, so that it's, that all the germs, yes, to sterilize the meat. So yeah, and of course, whenever Europeans hear that they are supposed to eat chlorine, they can somehow feel pain. So, so you know, in Germany, there's a big campaign against chlorinated chicken, but that's all in a way dangerous because the chlorinated chicken will not come, and that it will not come is very easy to be seen because you know Europe, the EU, is negotiating another treaty with Canada, the so-called CETA, that is already almost concluded, and the chlorinated chicken was excluded, and beef that's produced with hormones, also something very typical in the United States apparently, was also excluded, and the genetically modified organisms were also excluded. So, you know, in a way, it's very dangerous to mobilize against TTIP with stuff that's not going to be in the treaty. And you know, the reason why the chlorinated chicken was excluded and all the other stuff as well is not that the European Commission now was really bothered with the health of the Europeans, but the reason is very simple. The European agriculture is being subsidized with billions of euros every year. And we have lots of beef and lots of poultry over here. Much too much of it, in fact. because that's why we dump our beef on the developing countries. So of course no one wants to have more beef from the United States and Europe. So everything was done to somehow make sure that the beef, all the chlorinated chicken will not come. So yeah, and it was the agricultural industry in Europe that made sure that chickens and everything else like that was excluded from the treaty with Canada. And of course the same will happen with TTIP. So, but that will be step one, coming back to my topic. Step one will be a treaty that is very, very harmless. And they only agree on things that's easy to agree on, like blinkers for cars. Now, step two is the point that's really dangerous. Because what this agreement will install is a so-called regulatory cooperation, something that Melinda mentioned. And that means that the agreement will stipulate that any new law has to be checked at a very early stage, whether it has a major impact on trade. Now, you can, of course, claim that anything has a major impact on trade, whether it be minimum wages, health regulations, environment regulations, everything has an impact on trade. And that means that the companies on both sides of the Atlantic have lots of possibilities for lobbyism at the very early stage of each new law. And that is the real danger of, 1 minute, yeah. Okay, so that's the real danger of TTIP. Now coming in 1 minute to the question why there is such a major resistance in Germany, that's because we are very lucky. We have one of the very famous cases when it comes to these investment protection clauses called ISDS. I don't know whether you have ever heard of Vattenfall. Vattenfall is a Swedish company that has nuclear power plants in Germany. And as you know, Germany wanted to phase out, our conservative Chancellor Merkel wanted to phase out nuclear power after Fukushima. So she ordered eight of the 17 power plants, nuclear power plants, to be shut down. 2 of them belong to Vattenfall, the Swedish company. Now, this, instead of going to the German courts, which of course is possible, the other companies, the German companies, all went to court in Germany. They are also suing at the Constitutional Court. So there is a possibility, if you want to, as an energy company, to somehow sue the government within Germany. But Vattenfall shows another way. They just went to one of these arbitration courts. That's possible when under these investment protection clauses. And now they want to have 3.7 billion euros from Germany, from the taxpayers' money, because they had to shut down 2 of their power plants. Now, of course, that is really very controversial in Germany. It's also something that we can explain within 90 seconds on a radio program. So the result of it is that 53% of all Germans are against TTIP, which is really a very important figure, because at the same time, almost all Germans know about TTIP. So, you know, you really have a completely informed population, out of which 53% are strictly against it. And because we are a federal state, in Germany you are more or less permanently, there are permanent election campaigns, because one of the many federal states is always voting. So, yeah, and each regional election is regarded to be important also for the Chancellor and her chances of being re-elected in the national election campaign. So in the end, you know, it's very easy in Germany to somehow fight against anything that's not popular with the population. Okay, thank you very much.
Ulrike, thank you so much. That's really brilliant, and we're going to try and emulate that level of, firstly, awareness, and secondly, opposition to TTIP in Britain as well. And in order to achieve that, we're going to try and mobilise as many different constituencies as possible. I'm really glad that our third and final speaker is going to be Nick Dearden, who's the Director of the World Development Movement. And WDM has been responsible for a lot of the mobilisation that we've already seen on TTIP, which I know Nick's going to speak about a lot. And particularly, nobody should be leaving without at least 10 copies of No TTIP Time, which you'll find all the way around you to give to your friends. So Nick, thank you so much for taking this one last bit. Thank you.
It's really great to be here because when a few of us said a few months ago we really need to do something about this treaty, nobody had heard of TTIP, almost nobody had heard of it, including most MPs hadn't heard of TTIP when we went to talk to them about it. And within just a few months, it's great that we've got this tour where we've got dozens of people coming every night, and we hope hundreds will be coming to the London meeting on Thursday and then taking action on Saturday, because this treaty goes right to the heart of everything that we have been fighting for many years. A more just, a more equal and a more sustainable society and world. All of that is threatened by this treaty. And one of the things that struck me when you were listening to everybody is, well, first of all, John said this is all secret, and then we're telling you what's in the treaty. So how does this square? And this is very interesting because in Parliament last week, MPs were told British MPs are not allowed to see the European mandate, which is the basis on which this treaty is being negotiated. This is a great thing to go to your MP with, actually, because if there's one thing MPs do not like, it's being told they are not allowed to see something, especially the basis of the negotiations for such a massive treaty as this. So how do we know? Well, the reason we know is because so much stuff is being leaked, and it's appearing on WikiLeaks and it's appearing on various sites, and every single leak that we get confirms that we're absolutely right to be extremely concerned about this. So this morning, Friends of the Earth in Europe, who are working with us, put out the latest leak, which is from the energy chapter. And what it shows is that TTIP is being seen as a way of Europe weaning itself off Russian gas and Middle Eastern oil, for which there are many security concerns around, of course, and onto American shale gas. And what that's going to mean is a massive expansion of shale gas, that's to say fracking, in the United States that will be supplying our energy needs rather than looking to renewable energy. As a matter of fact, it's going to be very difficult under some of the terms of the energy clause to subsidise renewable energy in the way that we need to if we're going to create a sustainable planet, and we're still going to be here as a human society in the next 100 years or so. So that's one thing. We know for a fact there is a massive argument going on, and we know because people have been quite open about it. The US Secretary of Agriculture stood up a couple of weeks ago and said, you know, the European Union is just going to have to get real about the kind of food it accepts. I mean, Americans eat it, so it's fine. So you're just going to have to accept it. And more or less just said that. And then Europe is having an absolute tantrum because America is nervous about opening up its financial system to lower regulations that we currently have in Europe. Obama did at least bring in, following the financial crash, better regulations on American banks than we have here in Europe. We know full well that Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the investment banks, have been lobbying like hell the British government and the European government, and they're saying we absolutely demand that financial regulation is in here, because it's quite clear they see this as a way of getting around higher regulation in the United States and creating a race to the bottom. And they're so angry about it that they've thrown their toys out of the pram last week and said, if you're not doing this, then we're not going to have any finance in there whatsoever. So they're stomping around, but in doing that, actually revealing what their true, the true agenda is. And I want to tell you, unusually for me, a happy story. And the happiest part of the story is that it's a true story. And it's already been referred to a bit by my friends on the panel. In the mid-1990s, a group of countries got together to begin negotiating something called the Multilateral Agreement on Investment. And the Multilateral Agreement on Investment was very like TTIP in all sorts of ways. It set out to rewrite the rules of the global economy in favour of big business and in favour of capital. It embedded privatisation, it embedded the free flow of capital, it embedded deregulation in its very essence. This is what it was all about. And furthermore, it would have given companies, it would have given big business, transnational companies, the right to sue governments if they broke those rules. So it would lock in these pro-corporate rules. So it all sounds very familiar. It is very familiar because this is exactly what TTIP's about. They've been trying to do this for a very long time, and we know this has come from exactly the same people who lobbied for it the first time round. The big business lobbyists in both Brussels and in Washington. Now, when the agreement came to the attention of very similar organisations to the ones on this panel. In fact, they may have been the same organisations sitting on this panel. In 1997, we went to battle on this. It's interesting because it was the first campaign that actually used, the first international campaign that used the internet in a big way as a campaign tool. And we beat it. We won. They had to withdraw the multilateral agreement on investment. And the energy that flowed from that campaign, combined with the energy that flowed from the campaign that was lost in the United States around NAFTA, and the campaign against irresponsible finance that was embedded in Jubilee 2000 against the unjust debt, these things combined to create the most incredible international movement against the kind of policies that were being pushed by politicians and officials on the global stage on behalf of their corporate masters. It was called the anti-globalization movement, not because it wasn't international in its outlook, but because it opposed this economic project called globalization, which is all about taking power off ordinary people and handing it to big business. And we went to Seattle, and we stopped the WTO dead in its tracks, stopped it from doing that. And we went to Genoa, and we stopped the IMF in its tracks from doing that. And we pushed back the agenda of corporate power and corporate control. Now, obviously, we didn't win everything, or the world would be a very different place than it actually is. But we drew a line. We drew a line that was extremely important and that created many of the links that my organisation enjoys across the world today that makes us, I hope, a reasonably effective organisation. TTIP's about crossing that line. And so are the two other trade agreements that stand behind this. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is another trade agreement which Melinda's been fighting tooth and nail in the United States at the moment with some great success. And TISA, the Trade in Services Agreement, which is coming up behind TTIP and which is a super privatisation agreement. These three agreements together represent the biggest transfer of power from people to corporations that we've seen in the last 10 years. But we can stop it. And I think the other panelists have been modest about their achievements, actually, because if you look at what Public Citizens done in the United States in the creation of this coalition, they have prevented President Obama from being able to negotiate and agree these trade agreements, the TPP especially, but it will have an impact on TTIP as well, in the way that he wants. Congress has said, we're keeping control of this, we're not giving you fast-track authority, you have to come back clause by clause with this agreement. He can't do that. So they are holding up at the moment, because of their campaign in the United States, they have given us the best chance in the world of stopping this. All they have to do is hold it up long enough, and time is on our side, that Obama will hit the elections and surely not want to go back to Congress week after week and depend upon Republican votes for getting this through. In Germany, because of the campaign that's been waged in Germany, the European Commission has been forced to do what it really didn't want to do, and that's stop negotiating on this ISDS mechanism and hold a public consultation on it. The public consultation is a charade, but nonetheless it's given us a window of opportunity, and I'm really pleased that over the last few days we've been joined in this campaign by groups like 38 Degrees, and the day before they were going to close the consultation, they got 30,000 submissions that crashed the system, and they've had to extend the consultation, so there's still time to write in and say, we don't accept the terms of this consultation, we do not want it. We do not want this ISDS mechanism, this corporate tribunal by which foreign corporations can take our government to court for implementing legislation that protects people and the environment. And I just want to throw in one more example, because I think it's this that people really can't believe. At this moment, the tobacco giant Philip Morris, that makes Benson & Hedges and some other brands, is taking Uruguay to court for putting health warnings on cigarette packets because it says this damages our profits. It's taking the government of Australia to court for putting cigarettes in plain packaging. Damages our profits. There is a mining company taking Canada to court because the state of Quebec said we want a moratorium on fracking. Damages our profits. If a government comes to power in this country that wants to renationalise the railways, that wants to control energy prices, that wants to remove private capital from the National Health Service, it will be possible at that point for an American company or a subsidiary of a European company based in America to take the government to court and say that damages our profits. So it's really serious, and that's why, you know, what I'm saying to people is, if you care about the NHS, you need to stop TTIP. If you care about stopping climate change, you need to stop TTIP. If you care about tackling fuel poverty in our own society, you need to stop TTIP. If you want to regulate the banks, you need to stop TTIP. If you care where your food comes from, you need to stop TTIP because it removes our power to make those decisions, not just tomorrow, but forever into the future. Now, we have already started to build a nice coalition around this, as I said, and the coalition, at the date of this newspaper was written on the back, and it's a mixture of social justice organisations, environmental organisations, very importantly trade unions who come out solidly behind the campaign, and grassroots organisations like Occupy London, which have been very involved in our London action. And we've done this newspaper and some lovely posters, which you're also welcome to take. Depending on which thing you're more interested in, you can take a different poster, to advertise a day of action on Saturday. We've got a big day of action in London, but there are days of action planned in 14 places around the country. I hope there's one in Birmingham, but I should have checked actually what was going on here in Birmingham. But even if you just have a street stall, even if you just go out and do something on Saturday, take a picture, tweet it with the No TTIP hashtag, we begin to get the feeling, not just in this country but all around Europe, that this is a campaign that's growing and a campaign that you can win. And hopefully the range of different people in this room, I know from talking to a few of you at the beginning, you're all from different organisations but on the same side on this issue. The coalitions, I hope, that can be built not just nationally but in local areas around this as well, mean that when we beat TTIP, as I think we will, we don't have to stop there. And we use the energy that we can create through that campaign to defeat TISA and to express our solidarity with our friends in the US and in the Pacific and defeat the TPP. And then we begin building a new society and defeating corporate interests across the board. And it seems incredible, but it really is what happened with the anti-globalization movement. People need a victory, people need to feel they can do something and they have the power to do something. TTIP gives us that opportunity. It brings us all together and shows us that all of the things we want in society, our interests are in common in terms of defeating this thing. And then we go on to support each other's movement and build the kind of society that we really want to see, where the tiny, tiny few can no longer monopolise all the resources in the world. We need to share them out for a more equal and more sustainable future. And I hope this is the beginning of that. Thank you.
Brilliant call to arms, really, really inspiring, and a really nice start to be able to throw open the discussion for everybody in the room. We have a full hour before we will divide the room into people who will sing the German national anthem and people who will sing the Brazilian national anthem. So get ready in your heads as to which one you're going to be able to sing. But I'm really glad to be able to throw it open, to be talking about all of the things which we're going to be doing locally. Any thoughts, questions, comments? And the first person I want to ask, because we really just had the NHS mention, is Sarah from Unite, my union. So I'm really, really pleased and proud that she's here also to speak on this, particularly looking at the whole connection with the NHS and with the fragmentation of our health services, which we're really, really threatened with by TTIP. So while you're all thinking about what questions, thoughts, comments you want to go, I'm going to ask Sarah to step forward and speak about that. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm certainly not an expert, and I don't think I can follow the same kind of informative approach, but I can certainly give an idea of what's happening. So I'm here wearing a number of hats. One of them is, yes, I work for Unite, and yes, we support this action against, obviously, the TTIP agreement. I'm also here on behalf of a community campaign that's recently been set up in Staffordshire, and we've just changed our name to Cancer Not-for-Profit. And the reason that I'm here is that we've actually joined forces with a number of different trade unions, with religious groups, with community groups, and we're still looking for more. So if you know any, throw them our way, we'll have anybody. What's happening in Staffordshire is part of this encroaching issue of privatisation in the NHS. So some of you may be aware that the Health and Social Care Act came in 2012, and what this did was introduce a greater level of marketisation, so that private companies, which we already had a degree of, suddenly have come to the forefront. This means that there's some new terminology and there's a whole new structure. the change has been that the providers that were preferred, which were generally NHS, are now up against any qualified, and this means that private companies can bid on the same contracts as the NHS. So what we have seen is that any major contract that has been forced to go out to tender because the law has said that it must, has been won by the private sector. We have seen no NHS organisation win large contracts. In Staffordshire, the largest contract to date has just gone out to tender. It's worth £1.2 billion and it's for cancer care and end-of-life services. That's 5% of the total NHS budget, which is potentially going to go out to a private company to decide. I thought it was very interesting that we're talking about secrecy and a Dracula strategy, which actually applies very much here. This is something which, from the information that we've managed to gather, has been going on for about 2 years. The discussion of the idea has been going on for 2 years, and yet the tender process was only announced sort of publicly about 3 months ago, and the deadline for submitting bids, that's from both the private sector and the NHS, is about to close in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. So for something that's been in discussion for a number of years, they've not given much time for people to think of the solution. So we have also found that there's been very little information about this. There's been very little public consultation. They say they've done one, but there's been no option to submit comments to a website. And apparently they may have spoken to a few hundred people. Now I'm going to run through a few statistics. The population that this covers is 800,000 people. And the tender value being £1.2 billion, and it's split between the cancer care at almost 700 million, and the end of life at almost, 500 million, which gives you the 1.2 in total. So that means that £1,500 per person, of which we estimate that £477 would be management costs and fees. So if this is going to go out to the private sector, that's 1/3 of that money potentially is up for grabs for them to play with, and a large portion of that will obviously be profit. So we're very concerned that what we're going to see is this top slicing of our NHS money, that rather than it being reinvested into our public service, is going to go over into tax havens and whatever else. So our campaign, obviously, I've got some information and I can pass that around, and I have a petition as well. And I'd very much like for people to sign it and to spread the word about the campaign. We've also started to do a little bit of campaigning on the TTIP, because again, the NHS, in relation to that, because of this degree of marketisation that's come in, is actually very much at risk from TTIP. Because the private companies have already got their hooks in, and with the opening up we've already heard, they're going to start saying, well, no, the whole of that service is up for grabs. So we'll no longer even be able to stop some of these through the campaigns. It won't happen. The law that we've got at the moment, which has helped push this through, and the bill, is based on competition law, which means that even if a private sector lose a bid, so some of these contracts have already gone out, they've automatically been challenged, as we've heard. They just challenge it straight away. They say, no, you can't do it more cost effectively than we can do it. So again, it gets challenged, and then it goes back to the private sector. And we're very worried that with this, there is a high risk of that. But the problem with the secrecy has meant that actually most of our NHS organisations are on the back foot, because the private companies are already there, they're already producing, their bids to go forwards, and we're very worried that actually we're not going to have very much time to turn this around. So I think that's all I have to say really on that. But yeah, if you would support the campaign, we'd be grateful. And certainly there are lots of other NHS campaigns going on, and I know that in terms of TTIP, I know that the Keep Our NHS public group in South Warwickshire have been campaigning on TTIP for a number of months now. And certainly getting that message out and being really simple and clear about, this is about money, this is only about money. And people don't like that. And specifically with the NHS, in terms of having something that everybody can get around, in terms of, obviously you mentioned the nuclear power as being something that unanimously united Germany, the NHS possibly could be something that could unanimously unite the UK. And certainly there are petitions saying exclude it, which is brilliant, and we need to do that at the very least. But perhaps it will be something that people will see, well, that's just one example of the threat that we're facing. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's really, really really good example of how we can try and build this campaign and link in all of those different aspects. And it is really important to remember, the US health companies absolutely got their eyes out for the NHS. They're not after the sort of 8, 9, 10% of money that goes in the private sector here. They're after the NHS, and they have been for years and years, and this is their big opportunity. We were on the television this morning, the BBC World TV News for the first time has actually opened up this discussion. We were discussing it with them, and they were saying, well, Vince Cable says that the NHS is completely safe from TTIP. Absolute nonsense. We'll never be able to get it back into public hands. Right, let's go over to everybody for comments, thoughts, questions. We've got one at the front, 2 at the back. Either address them to people or just raise them.
Or just on the subject of privatisation in the NHS, I work in the community, and I know that community nursing services in Devon and Cornwall are Virgin, and Virgin's not put any money into it because they can't be sure how long their contract's going to be or whatever. And in Birmingham, then the Young People's Mental Health Service is coming up for tender. Well, tenders are already invited on that one. So privatisation is well on the way.
2 at the back. Whichever order you want to go in.
Right, I'm Andy Chaffett. I'm actually the chair of Birmingham People's Assembly Against Austerity. And those who don't know us, we're part of a national campaign fighting against austerity in Britain, and TTIP is one of our campaigns. John raised it at our last national meeting. I also work in the NHS. I'm a Unison member. I can tell you that the drug and alcohol services for Birmingham are going to a private company in the next week. We decided at the council cabinet meeting next Tuesday, and it's a private company that's got it. Basically, they're going to destroy 25 years of hard work of trying to develop community alcohol and drug services in this city, and it's going to go out to profit. But it also means my trust, when I work in mental health, are spending a fortune trying to fight for contracts, and services are getting divided. So we actually run the drug contract in Wolverhampton and some minute contract in Stoke, but we won't be running it in Birmingham, but we will run it in Solihull. And it's madness, because people won't be getting the same service. We know that, but also we're spending a fortune, as I say. Whole teams are being, hundreds of thousands of pounds are being spent just on fighting for contracts. And that could be spent on other services. But it also means, for the Staffordshire example, if you take cancer care out of the local hospitals and their PFI, they can't pay their PFI bill. Right? That trust cannot pay its private finance initiative bill. So the whole thing just doesn't add up. Right? It's all going to start collapsing. And that's where we've actually got to bring it back slightly. TTIP has got to be fought. We've also got to remind people this is a part of the general fight against austerity. This is about saying the working class cannot be made to pay for their crisis, and we won't accept our transfer of taxes from us to the rich, because that's what they're after. That's all it's about. They cannot make enough profit as they're doing at the moment, so they want to steal the money from the states. They want to take our money as much as possible. And we've got to stand up and get it down as blunt as that. Because it is that blunt. They, the rich, Branson, call them whoever they want. They don't pay tax, they don't like paying tax, and apparently they can take their billions with them when they die somehow, because they seem to keep on wanting to accumulate. Well, it doesn't make sense, does it? So we know that. So we've actually got to start arguing about redistribution, as the comrade from the World Development Movement said. We've actually got to argue that ordinary people have got to have resources. But on the health service, it's just going to be desperate in the next few months. You're right about the youth mental health services. My trust is bidding, the Children's Trust are bidding, who run it at the moment, and private companies will be bidding. And that's scary. Young people who are mentally ill, possibly being looked after by commercial firms who aren't that bothered about what happens to them in 5 years' time. Because there won't be a plan for what happens in 5 or 10 years' time, because there might not be a resource or someone else to take it over in 5 or 10 years' time. And that's the real problem, because it's not long-term planning. And the NHS, if it's anything, is long-term planning. It's got to be. Cradle to the grave. So, if people want to get involved in People's Assembly, and I'll finish on this, please see me afterwards. And if you want to protest against this government, If you haven't already had the leaflets, there's a demo in Birmingham on September 28th. It's supported by the People's Assembly. Unfortunately, we've got the Tory Party conference in our city. We wish to give them a real drummy welcome. So if you wish to join in, please do. And it doesn't just have to be a march around town, because the Central Library is now open, so it's going to be very difficult to stop us getting as close to the ICC as they've done in previous years. So please join in, and I've got leaflets if you want them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've also got at the back some of the People's Assembly big broadsheets about not September, but just in 3 days' time on Thursday this week, the strike which is taking place with Unison, Unite, PCS, NUT, UCU and FBU all coming out. And so that's something which we really want to try and support as well. People who are trying to take this action against austerity, both internationally and nationally as well. Gentleman in the green and then come forward.
Yeah. I found this meeting this evening very, very instructive, and I hope to take away with me quite a few of these leaflets and the information contained in it. What depresses me, I must admit, is that the whatever stance or the notional left in this country, and also unfortunately the trade union movement, has for too long been confused over the nature of the EU itself. And that's one part of this jigsaw puzzle, because the other part is the TTIP, going to be the agreement which will bring the US together with the EU. And that will exist, won't it, in terms of, because it's a neoliberal construct, both organisations, what it will do is, that will, in a very real sense, because various people have mentioned it here tonight, it will destroy what vestiges of democracy we do have in this country. Personally, I don't think much of Parliament in this country. I think it's run its course. But that's another question. The danger that we have now is that we are going to be dominated by neoliberalism for decades to come. And that will mean, ultimately, our penury and slavery. And that's a very real question. And, you know, if the EU, in its first instance, stood for the acceleration of privatisation, and it clearly did, any TTIP is going to be a super fast form of privatisation. And, you know, what's been mentioned quite rightly is that the NHS, it's also such stalwarts for the public good, hopefully, the BBC. The BBC will fall. It's all up in the air, it's all up for grabs, and it should not be. And we've got to do something, and we've got to do something fast, because I think time is running out.
I'm going to come back. Let me take the two more. So lady over there and then yourself, and then I'm going to come back to the panel in case anyone wants to respond to any of these. There haven't been questions yet, but that's all good, because comments is really wonderful.
I would welcome a comment back on this one at some stage maybe, but I just wanted to raise the issue of the role of businesses in the private sector in general, because you said if you care about X, Y and Z, then you need to be against TTIP. Well, I'd say that's probably also true, but if you run a small business, or if you care about small business, and I think whilst we all know small business owners who are, might be radiantly antisocial in some of the stuff they might argue for, they're also inherently more redistributive in terms of the structure than the corporations, which are being given all the power to do this. And I'm just thinking we need to remember some of the, and also like the guy behind said, the sorts of people that have recently been voting for parties like UKIP. Whilst we might not think we've got a lot in common with them, it's that powerlessness that they feel about things like TTIP, even if they might not know that's what it is, that causes them to feel that strongly. And I think we just need to make sure we've got those connections right, and that we talk to those people.
Thank you so much, yes.
I want to ask a question. It's a rather theoretical question, but it is a question that a number of people might ask. People who are worried, but who are not necessarily considering themselves socialist or anything like that. And that is, are you against any trade agreement at all? I mean, they might say, does that mean that you want to have a sort of protectionist world of national government, or a monopolised world of nationalised institutions? or do you want, are you prepared to accept trade and competition that goes with it in some sense, but if in some sense, then in what way different from this one?
But I'd like to come back to the three panellists on these issues of Europe, small, medium-sized enterprises, and this bigger issue of trade agreements per se.
Oh, yeah, well, as a German, I can only say that we really hope that Great Britain will stay within the EU. And I think, I know that in Britain there seems to be a slight majority for leaving the EU, but that would be really, really disastrous for Europe, and that would be a pity if you left. And now, to come back to your question, I mean, you had this feeling, I think, that if you wanted to stop TTIP, the easiest thing would be to leave the EU and then no longer be part of it. But you know, it will be possible, for all we know, to stop TTIP within each nation. Because even the Trade Commissioner de Gucht now admits that it is going to be a so-called deep treaty, which means that every national parliament has to accept it. It's not only the European Parliament that has to agree, but also Westminster. So, you know, you don't have to leave the EU in order to stop TTIP. And, well, as I said, we Germans hope that you will stay with us. We need you. And then the other question was whether we are against any trade agreement or not. No, of course not. If it was a normal trade agreement that was just trying to lower tariffs, nothing could be said against it. But the problem is that the tariffs are already very low. On average, they are just 3.5%. That's a WTO estimate for Europe and the US. So, you know, if the tariffs are very low already, you can hardly lower them. I mean, that's the reason why trade is flourishing, because there are hardly any tariffs left. So that's why I insist on saying it is not about trade. Now, you know, just last week I had the possibility or the opportunity to speak to a Congress member, a Democrat, who's been in the House of Representatives for the last 40 years. And he said that the US, I don't know whether Melinda would agree, will never ever sign any agreement that does not include ISDS as these investment protection clauses that are so controversial in Germany. And the reason was that, you know, they wanted to have these investment protection in the TPP, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Because if the investment protection was excluded in the TTIP, it would of course be very difficult to explain to the US why Vietnam, for example, should accept these kind of protection clauses. So if we manage to get ISDS out of the treaty, it will never ever come. And as David or Nick already said, the resistance in Germany already had the effect that the Trade Commissioner was forced to have a moratorium of 3 months, which of course was just due to the fact that he didn't want to have this issue being discussed during the European election. But you know, the trouble will just not stop. So I think the chances are very good to get it stopped, even in Britain.
So just a couple thoughts on the question about TTIP and how it impacts democracy. I think that's absolutely right. The really pernicious and dangerous thing about these treaties is that they lock this in. It's locked in. It's not like our democratic policy making where you pass a law and then you realize the circumstances have changed, and so then you can build a coalition to change the law. That's not what happens. It basically locks in this very deregulation agenda for the future, and that's why it's so dangerous, because it's very difficult to change. All parties have to agree to change anything, and it's very difficult when you lock it into a treaty. And so I mean, in the same way, I would say the same thing about, of course, I mean, we as public citizens certainly aren't opposed to to robust trading relationships between Europe and the US, and as Enrique said, there already is very robust trade and investment between the US and Europe. I mean, I would question why you need to lock in something for the foreseeable future in terms of a treaty in any case, but the first thing that would need to happen for it to be an agreement that could benefit the people is you'd have to have a very different process that's not done in secret, that doesn't have 600 corporate advisors that are writing the rules where the rest of us can't see what's in there, because it doesn't take a genius to think, well, I wonder what the rules are going to look like given who is at the table writing the rules. So, so we need a different process. Whenever we bring up the question of transparency to the negotiators, we get back this very bogus argument, which is that you can't negotiate in public because you're holding back, you don't want to put your full agenda on the table because then you don't have room to negotiate. And they're talking about this as if it were a contract between two private parties, but what we're talking about is policy making. We're talking about it's like creating laws and policies, which is done in our democratic processes in a much more public and transparent way. And so that argument never makes any sense to me. So I mean, I think that, and then there are definitely ways to promote trade, but also make sure that you're protecting the sovereign right of people to make decisions around the safeguards that are important to them. You can, if you're going to have, you could try to harmonize, but have that only be a floor, not a ceiling of what kinds of regulations or safeguards you can put in for the future. So, I mean, there's a very different way to go about this enterprise, and it's not surprising that it's not going that way given who is at the table and who's very much in, a part of the conversation. On the question of small business and protect, and also the right, at least in the United States, there's definitely, this is one of those issues that we kind of cut a horseshoe where the elites of both parties, of the Democrats and Republicans, support this enterprise, this neoliberal agenda. You actually see on both ends of the spectrum, though, that the grassroots do not support this. And they don't support it because of sovereignty issues. The conservatives in the United States do not feel very pleased about handing over the sovereignty to a tribunal that's housed at the World Bank or the United Nations. I don't know if you've heard that in the U.S. there's a lot of concern about those institutions from that side for a very different reason than our concerns are. But I do think that there are messages that can resonate across the political spectrum at the grassroots level. And if we're going to win, we have to be willing to kind of make those, utilize those in however, where we feel comfortable. So I would say that. And then on the ISDS question in the U.S., unfortunately, I think Representative Miller is right that the U.S. corporations would not want a TTIP without ISDS in it. And though in the United States, there's a growing concern, the National Conference of State Legislatures, so that's the body that encompasses all of the U.S. state parliamentary bodies. They have a position against having ISDS and U.S. free trade agreements because of their concern of what it would mean for state sovereignty and state policy making. And so there is a growing movement, though I do think it's true that in terms of kind of the corporate power, probably not.
So on that question of wider alliances, I think you're completely right. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that the European Commission has only just put out a consultation for small and medium enterprises. Oh, it's hilarious. They've been talking about how important this is for small and medium enterprises. They've only just put a web consultation out, and it's only got like 2 weeks or something for people to fill it in. It's crazy. Couldn't be more of a charade. I think one of the big issues in this country is how we've got a tough job there, because a lot of small and medium businesses really swallowed the neoliberal mantra under Margaret Thatcher, I think, in the 1980s. I've never really understood why, because it seems really clear that these kind of agreements are absolutely antithetical to your interests as a small and medium enterprise, and to have you thrown into competition with big business in this way. But I think that reaching out is really important. UKIP is hilarious because they don't oppose TTIP. I mean, how extraordinary. How can a party which bases its whole philosophy on national sovereignty not oppose TTIP? And I'm absolutely sure that some of the people that voted for them would be horrified by that position, and it might at least be a good opportunity for us to embarrass them. Especially if we have MEPs in the European Parliament now who aren't actually, I mean, we've just been having a great argument with somebody in, one of the new MEPs in a local paper in Gloucestershire, through one of our local activists who's having an argument with this MEP who won't say that they oppose TTIP. So I think it's a really good opportunity for you. I know you do have some in the West Midlands to embarrass them. I mean the same with David Cameron, who talks about sovereignty all the time. I mean, you know, absolutely ludicrous. So I think we can take the front foot on some of that stuff. And then on John's question, which is a great question, you know, it's too easy probably to portray us as a load of protectionists. There was some great work done by an organisation called Alternative Trade Mandate last year, and if you're interested, please go to their website, Alternative Trade Mandate. I guess it's alternativetrademandate.org. And they did a little manifesto, if you like, of what a decent trading system would look like. And this isn't just like pie in the sky, a group of academics who sat around thinking about this. These principles are already being put into practice in Latin America, for example, where there are alternative principles that underlie a trading system, what they call the Bolivarian trade system of the alternatives, that actually says we don't want trade that is about a race to the bottom in terms of regulations. Rather, we want trade that helps poorer countries in the region to get on their feet more, to raise living standards in their country. We're not going to have trade based on sweatshops. We're going to have it based on decent workers' rights. And products that are produced in decent conditions. And we're actually going to use trade to improve standards across the continent. Now, obviously I'm not saying that that works absolutely perfectly, but to at least begin to have the discussion based on the principles you want to see is surely far, far better than to have it based on precisely the opposite principles we've got here. And just finally to say, we're not doing this in isolation in Europe and the US. So my organisation is one that normally talks about international issues and what's happening in developing countries. And there is a real struggle against these things in developing countries. And for us to win on TTIP here is the most important thing we could do at this time if we want fairer trade rules in the developing world too. Because from Ecuador and Bolivia through to South Africa, through to Indonesia, until the latest elections, India was being counted in there, I feel it won't be anymore. There's a push to get rid of these ISDS mechanisms. I mean, in Ecuador and Bolivia, they just, you know, put the head of the World Bank on a plane when the new governments came to power and said, bye, we're not having this anymore. In South Africa, they're ripping them up. In Indonesia, they're ripping them up. There is a wave of protest and resistance against these kind of free trade agreements. And us winning here would be the most incredible impetus to those struggles across the world.
Let's go back for another round. I've got the fellow here in the blue. And go right at the back and keep going if you want to keep either raising questions or comments.
Evening, my name's Nick Hart. I'm a member of the Birmingham Socialist Party, and without sort of retreading a sort of ground that's already been covered, I think it's fairly obvious that TTIP would be a boon for the big business internationally in terms of accelerating the race to the bottom that's already been taking place in terms of wages, conditions, public services, and should be opposed for that reason. But to be honest, I think it's worth facing up to the fact that already the capitalist class, big business, get the laws they want, and that's through the existing mechanisms available to them, such as sponsoring entire political parties. I mean, just the other day there was the guest list from the Tories' latest sort of wine and dine event, where it costs tens of thousands of pounds a head to attend, and sort of for these big business individuals to basically have a chance to lean on government ministers and all the rest of it. And it just goes to show that even with the sort of existing parliamentary system, which TTIP would play a role in bypassing, and sort of what existing laws we have to protect workers' rights and all that in this this country. You can't really control what you don't own, because it's not just the wealth that the rich control, but also the means of creating it. But every general needs foot soldiers, and we've had the strikes this week mentioned. You just got to look at the fact that sort of when particularly transport workers or teachers come out on strike, the papers are in uproar. They sort of throw as much mud at them as they can. But when you're out and things grind to a halt, but then when MPs go off for their summer holiday, or bankers head off to Tuscany for the summer, or wherever it is they go, nobody notices, and that's why. Whilst it's my belief that whilst we have the system of capitalism in place, whether it's through TTIP or any other trade agreements, or just by, like I say, the existing means available to them, one way or another, and we've already had sort of the various movements that I'm slightly too young to remember that took place in the 90s around Seattle and all that around and NAFTA. They'll keep coming back. It might get delayed till after the US election, but big business, they want to what they give with one hand, they want to take with the other tomorrow, and that's why I think we need to sort of follow the advice that Russell Brand gave, and have a revolution to take control for ourselves, and sort of break away from this system of big business and capitalism.
Thank you. Yes, phone at the back, and then.
Can you just tell us what the declared policies of the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats is to this? And my MP in Northfield, Richard Burden, is a Labour MP, and he's a junior minister. What can I ask him to do? Because the backbenchers sort of seem a bit more willing to do various things than people who have a sort of front bench seat. And also, I don't completely understand, does this have anything to do with the World Trade Organization? Or how does it relate to that?
Yes, I was just going to say, just a little word for the EU bureaucrats in the 90s. It is actually possible to harmonise trade and remove barriers to trade by raising standards, and that's essentially what happened throughout Europe in the 1990s. There was legislation and then the directives which harmonised standards. Health and safety at work is one of them, that's my area of expertise. And negotiations in detail on standards that underpin those, where standards were raised, particularly in this country who thought we've got brilliant health and safety legislation. We were given a bit of a boost by some of the better legislation that were in other countries, and I dare say we pulled up the legislation elsewhere. Don't look at me like that, because it's true.
Well, we have the means to do it ourselves.
No, well we didn't. This made us better, and it actually, we shared a lot of stuff on legislation on the environment as well, and indeed workers' rights. So it is possible. It's not always the case that sharing these things is worse. So you can do it. I'm not saying TTIP's any, but it's dreadful. But it is possible to do these things well, so long as there's a democratic involvement in it, which there was at that time, with the trade unions being involved, with business being involved, with some goodwill from people who knew what they were talking about.
Britain is a low-wage economy. Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
Just about what we're going to be doing a story at the weekend, go to the end, just about how to really, there's so much there, how do you get people, they want to go away with action, which is safe to do.
So actions in the great. Any more thoughts, questions, comments? Because otherwise I'm going to bring it back for the last time and then give people a chance to start singing. Any more thoughts, comments, questions? Speak now. Go on.
Yeah, there's precious little collective bargaining left in this country between unions and their employers, and it's being made even worse by the existence of the EU, and it will be made even far worse by the TTIP agreement. If you think things are bad now in the EU, and the Greeks and other people can attend to that, well, we ain't seen nothing yet.